boils and ghouls, and welcome back to another episode of the C-Bus Paranormal Paracast. I'm your host, Johnathon Robson, and today we're going to be discussing the ghost of Mohican State Forest, as well as their Bigfoot sightings. This will obviously be a Halloween edition of the Paracast, and will also be our final episode of Season 1. But never fear, the Paracast will rise once again from the grave in January with a brand new season. Speaking of the upcoming year, I will be producing a few rare mini-episodes for our Patreon members entitled Legends and Lore. This series will focus on local legends, beast, and ghost stories. Eventually, some episodes might make their way to the main audio stream, but it will be quite a while after their Patreon debuts. These episodes will be a fun perk for our loyal monthly subscribers, and I've got a lot of interesting topics in mind. I'm also going to be revamping our Patreon tiers in between seasons, with a few new tricks and treats, so stay tuned and thank you for the support. As I previously mentioned on the last episode, our website cbusparanormal.com will also be getting a facelift in the next few weeks. I'm currently working on reanimating it for the new season, and I'll try to make it a one-stop shop for all things C-Bus Paranormal. With all the restrictions being implemented on social media these days, I want to make sure you guys have a place to be informed of what we're doing, as well as seeing what we're posting about. The ups and downs of Zuck's social media stranglehold is starting to be a little frustrating as a content creator and page owner these days. TikTok and YouTube also seem to be having their issues. Unfortunately, it is what it is. Regardless, the show and operation will continue and go on as scheduled. Ironically, this will be our third straight episode of covering locations in or near Mohican Forest itself. As we've previously discussed on prior episodes, the land has been home to a few violent events between Native Americans and settlers, possible hauntings, and in recent years there have been quite a few Bigfoot sightings. Some of the area's stories, facts, and history have been distorted over time, which always seems to be the case. While the legends and ghost stories have slowly taken over the narrative. So as always, I will do my best to sift through the facts and fiction and try to present the best episode I can on the subject with present-day information. With that being said, let's grab our shovels and dig into today's episode, Mohican State Forest. Mohican State Forest was once the hunting grounds of the Delaware Indians, and there were several villages located in the area. Settlement by non-Indians began at the turn of the 19th century, but overall the settlement did not increase until the Indians were driven from the area during the War of 1812. John Chapman, also known as Johnny Appleseed, frequented the region during the 1800s caring for his numerous apple tree nurseries. At one point his name and date were actually carved into the walls of the popular Lyons Falls waterfall, and it was an attraction for the park for years. Unfortunately, the etchings have since eroded with the passage of time. Mohican State Forest itself covers 4,541 acres. The popular Mohican State Park was developed in 1949, and it was originally named Clear Fork State Park. It was renamed in 1966 because there's another Clear Fork Park in Mansfield, Ohio. The park boasts several popular views and attractions such as Clear Fork Gorge, that is believed to have been formed by glacial meltwater 14 to 24,000 years ago. In the previously mentioned Lyons Falls, which we're about to get into. There's also a rickety old 1934 fire tower, where you can climb to the top and get a great high view of the Mohican area. And if you're afraid of heights, it's a real scream. Thankfully, from a researcher perspective, I actually live fairly close to Mohican Forest these days, and I was able to spend several days at Mohican this year, not only for the paranormal research, but also for hiking. To be honest, I'm getting older. My body's starting to feel a bit rougher on some days. So it's been fun to combine paranormal research with hiking and exploration. I've stated previously that while I have an interest in Bigfoot and other cryptids, I'm not necessarily a believer of all the stories that are being passed around. However, I do think there are a lot of great eyewitness reports and stories behind some of these legends and discussions. I'm personally in this for the thrill of the hunt, as well as for the love of exploration. So let's start off with the ghostly claims and legends. Big Lions Falls and Little Lions Falls in Mohican Forest oddly enough have the most notable colorful legends. Local folklore attributes the name of the falls to two historic characters, both named Lions, but oddly enough they were unrelated to each other. One of these individuals is named Thomas Lyons, an Indian chief, and the other was Paul Lyons. Unfortunately, because of these similarities, both of these individual stories blended together over the years through the area's legends and folklore. To make matters even worse, the locals were even confused how Lyons Falls was originally named. The falls had become a popular picnicking spot for the local communities, and during an excursion, a party of individuals involved with the Mansfield 400 stumbled upon a gravesite at the falls. Like many others, they believed that the individual buried there was Thomas Lyons, the celebrated Indian chief of that name. Upon their return to Mansfield, they told others that they had stumbled upon the grave of a great warrior, which gained a strong interest in the community. They would eventually return to the site to fire volleys over the grave, dance a war dance, and give Indian funeral calls. They came home satisfied that they performed a suitable commemorative ceremony over the earthly resting place of the old chief. So what's the problem with this story? Well, the person that was buried there wasn't Thomas Lyons. Whoops. Thomas Lyons, apparently as folklore states, was a dreaded renegade and reputed to be the ugliest man alive. Apparently he had a lot of fans. The Indian chief was a prominent figure in a Wyoming massacre in 1778, and he was also a noted character in the early formation of Richland County. Apparently Thomas was infamous for his legendary necklace of 99 human tongues. He boasted to make it an even 100 before he died. Before he could achieve this grisly feat, Lyons was ambushed and killed on an old stagecoach road passing through the forest near the cave. He was killed by Joe Haynes, who was looking to avenge the murder of one of his kinsmen. Joe ended up burying the old chief in Lady's Swamp in the southern part of Jefferson Township. Apparently, some visitors have claimed to see a spectral Indian in the area seeking his next victim to this day. I'm personally not sold on the ugliest man alive story or the infamous necklace, but they do make for an entertaining story. It's worth noting that Thomas also had ties to the Greentown Indian settlement, which means these legends and statements likely originated from the early settlers and their horrible experiences with Indian attacks. I have a hunch that some of these stories are tied to the Copus massacre that we discussed on the Charles Mill Lake episode, and that the area's tragic past has now bled into its own ghost story over the years, just in the Mohican Forest area. So now we'll move on to Paul Lyons. The following was posted by the Mohican State Park Facebook page. There's a haunted history at Mohican State Park thanks to a man named Paul Lyons. Legend has it that Paul Lyons was a recluse who lived in the area with his milk cow over a century ago. One dark and stormy night, Paul realized the cow had wandered off into the woods and he went out to find it. He could barely hear the sound of the bell around the cow's neck over the moaning of the harsh wind. He followed the faint clanking into the darkening woods to the edge of the steep falls. Paul could see very little in the driving storm and he lost his footing on the slick rock beneath his feet, falling 80 feet to his death. Folks say that on dark nights the sound of a cowbell can be heard on the trail to Lyons Falls, and the figure of a man waving a lantern can be seen at the top of the cliff. The Lyons that was buried at the falls was a white man named Paul Lyons, and he wasn't a hermit as some legends state. He had a wife and kids and would for the most part keep to himself. It's unclear what Paul's motives were for leaving the civilization of the East and moving into this uninhibited part of the country. He refused to give details or explain his reasons of hiding himself away in the woods, and led a fairly retired life. The land in which his family lived on was too rough to till, and he never attempted to clear the timber or cultivate the soil. Paul simply built a cabin amidst the trees and passed his time hunting and fishing. Eventually, the area surrounding his home started to have more settlers, and he would routinely help his neighbors harvest their crops. He seemed to have money, and he always paid in cash for whatever he purchased. He was described as a large man that had a decent education. According to the Mansfield Semi-Weekly newspaper on November 22, 1898, it was reported that Paul Lyons died around 1856 while assisting in hauling logs, contrary to the popular cow story. The accident resulted in his death, and he was buried on the hill between the two waterfalls. His neighbor, Rosella Rice, had a headboard painted and lettered and put up at the site of his grave. But visitors shot marks on the board until it was destroyed by bullets. It's been said that his body was exhumed by a physician and the skeleton was used for research. A slight depression is now the only site that a body had been buried there. It was stated that Paul's wife was not an intellectual woman, and she was sent away to an asylum after his death. His son would eventually move out west, and he prospered. The News Journal newspaper from January 18, 1959 also discussed the grave robbing incident. The story says that Paul ended up as a skeleton in a young Loudonville doctor's office, having been dug up in a grave robbing incident. When word of the pilfered body and the doctor's skeleton got around, the doctor promptly left town. It's also said that Lyon's bones were never laid back to rest in the marked grave, now on a hill where a trail passes between the Big and Little Falls. Unfortunately, the likely true story of Paul Lyons has been lost to history, and legends and lore have continued to this day. To me, I'm not sure I buy the cow story that was conjured up by the state park system, and it seems like an incredibly detailed story for someone who is supposedly alone by himself at the time of his fall and death. If a cowbell rings in the forest and nobody is around, can it still somehow become a ghostly legend decades later? I would be more likely to believe that Paul died during an accident while working. However, I would be interested in finding out if the grave robbing incident actually took place, or if that's also a legend. To date, I can only find newspaper articles on these events. And I'm pretty sure Mohican State Park doesn't want me visiting the area with a shovel for confirmation. Altogether, I spent several days in the area and I wasn't able to witness any of these events. No specters, ghouls, phantom lanterns, or even cowbells made themselves known during my visits. I was also not able to pull any audio hits during my sessions. I find it ironic that poor Paul Lyons seemed to have wanted to escape the general population, to take his family to the woods, and for the most part not have to deal with other people, only for his tragic death to get twisted into various legends and tales that have lived on through several decades. In the process, he was often called a hermit and a squatter due to his lifestyle preferences. Even in death, it seems that Paul couldn't stay off the grid, and it's hard to say what has truly become of his remains. Alright, now let's get into the Bigfoot sightings of Mohican Forest. I think it's important that we dig into the origins of the Bigfoot creature itself for a minute. For over 400 years now, people have claimed to see a large hair-covered man-like animals in the wilderness of North America. In fact, the cultural histories of Native Americans and First Nation individuals include stories and beliefs about non-human people of the wild. Ironically, some of these stories also match up fairly well with some of today's reports and sightings. For several decades, witnesses have not only come forward claiming to have seen the creature, but at times they found large tracks, and in some cases even made casts of them. The casts are often extremely large and seem to have human-like features. While some witnesses have made claims that they photographed or filmed one of these creatures, to date there hasn't been any conclusive evidence to support that the creature actually exists. Despite this, Bigfoot and cryptid enthusiasts gather each year for festivals, hikes, and hunts, hoping to gather any form of proof that the creature actually exists. In the world of cryptozoology, it can be argued that Bigfoot, the Ohio Grassman, or Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, is king, with several reported sightings seemingly constantly coming in worldwide. The Mohican State Park area, and Ashland in general, has seen a large increase in Bigfoot sightings since 2010, and particularly the woods near Big Lions Falls. I want to discuss a few of the more recent sightings as I feel they're more relevant to our current research and discussion. In September of 2015, a possible Bigfoot sighting was made at Mohican State Park at the end of Camp Area B and Campsite 2. The following was taken from an interview on the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization website that describes what the witness seen on that night. Early Friday morning, September 18, 2015, 3 o'clock a.m. My wife and I were camping at Mohican State Park in East Central Ohio. We were camping in our van. My wife went to bed at about 10:30 p.m. and I turned in about 1:30 a.m. I had to leave the van to relieve myself. Man, they really are detailed on these, aren't they? I opened the van's side door. I have the interior lights set not to come on when the doors are open. I glanced around outside as I always do, and I stepped out of the van. The center of the road running through the camp area is about 25 to 30 feet from where I was standing. On my side of the road there were individual campsites bordering the road, and on the other side of the road is the Mohican River. My dying campfire cast a faint glow. The slightest overcast sky provided separation from the skyline and the tree line in the immediate area. Out of the corner of my eyes I detected a slight movement on the road, but everything was bathed in the shadow from the trees. I felt I was seeing a shadow of something. I leaned forward, peering into the darkness for a better look. The shadowed form booted toward the entrance of the camp area. All I could see was its silhouette. It was upright and moving on 2 feet. It stood at least 8 foot high. I watched in disbelief as it covered about 50 feet of distance with what seemed like 5 or 6 strides and disappeared into the darkness. I did notice that it had a slender appearance. I knew at once it was a Bigfoot. I had heard of other sightings in the area. I stood there still in disbelief, running through my mind what I had just seen. I questioned everything else that it could have been. Nothing else fit. My mind finally told me, "Robert, you know what you saw. A Bigfoot." In August of 2020, another report was made at the Pleasant Hill Lake Park. We're going to come back to this sighting a little bit later in the episode. The following information was taken from the park ranger's report and also posted on the BFRO website. On August 18, 2020, the Ashland County Sheriff's Office received a 911 call for unknown subjects throwing items at them from the woods at the primitive camp area located at Pleasant Hill Lake Park in Ashland County, Ohio. Park Ranger McClellan was dispatched and arrived shortly on the scene at campsite 417 and met with the caller Faye Steele and her family, husband and 2 kids. The witnesses advised that someone in the woods behind her campsite was throwing rocks or sticks at them and around their tent. Due to it being dark, the witnesses could not see who was throwing things at them. The husband went on to say he first thought it might be kids messing around in the woods, but when he yelled into the woods he did not hear any voices or noises indicating children, so he did not believe it was kids. The witnesses said a few minutes later they heard strange, loud, and weird noises coming out of the woods, at which time he made his young children go into the tent while he stood outside the tent with his small pocket knife out, just in case. The witnesses went on to say a few minutes later they heard a loud bang or knock, as if someone had smacked or punched the hard side of the wooden outhouse restroom located nearby on the other side of the primitive camp. When they turned and looked in that direction, they observed something run into the woods. The witness described what he saw as a tall, dark, and hairy figure run and disappear into the woods. The witness said the first thing he thought of when he seen it was Bigfoot. Park Ranger McClellan checked the area and was unable to locate anyone in the wooded area, and did not observe any damage to the outhouse structure. These witnesses were the only people camping in that area of Pleasant Hill Lake Park at the time. No further investigation was warranted at the time. In April of 2021, the local newspapers reported that a Sasquatch was spotted at the edge of the tree line behind the Warehouse 24 gym on the outskirts of Ashland. My 20-year-old stepdaughter had a visual sighting last night in Ashland, Ohio. The date was April 24, 2021. It was about midnight and she left a 24-hour gym that has woods behind it. She saw a gray, over 7-foot tall creature after hearing a twig snap. She stated it was way too large to be human, and it moved way too fast to be human. She called us from the local Bob Evans parking lot in tears, asking for us to come drive her home because she was so shook up. It was a terrifying experience for her. I went and inspected the area briefly the next day. I found many old deer tracks but no imprints of the creature she saw. I'm not a hunter or tracker, and only spent about 10 minutes in the area. She is one person I would consider an extremely reliable witness. She is a very responsible college student that is very moral and truthful. She does not drink or take drugs. The sightings in the area didn't stop there. The following comes from the Richland Source newspaper on July 16, 2021. Second possible Sasquatch sighting reported in Ashland County. Ashland County, the 51-year-old Ashland County man freely professes an interest in the Sasquatch phenomenon. But with more than 2 decades of work in the law enforcement business, he also knows he's seen something on June 9th that he can't easily explain. Was the second Bigfoot sighting of 2021 in Ashland County, coming on the heels of a reported encounter near a 24-hour gym on April 24th, just a few miles away? No one, including the second observer, can say for certain. I've tried to explain it away, but I can't, the man said Friday from his home north of US 30. In all the years I've lived here, I've never seen anything like it. After a 90-minute summer afternoon rain, the man, who asked his name not to be used in the story, was aboard his riding lawnmower when he saw something near the tree line next to the recently planted soybean field, perhaps 250 yards away. A large, all-black figure walking upright emerged from the tree line, walking diagonally in a northeast direction across the bean field, and then disappeared into another wooded area. Stunned, the man stopped his mower and just watched. He had no way to record what he was seeing. It had been raining hard right before I mowed. I normally keep the phone in my pocket, but I didn't want to have it with me in case it started raining again, the man said. It happened so quickly. There would have been no way for me to get back into the house and grab it. I knew it would be gone. As the creature walked, the man drove his mower about 35 yards closer to the edge of the bean field, unable to get closer. At that point, the dark figure was just east of the trail cam I was hoping it would cross, but it stayed to the north of it. It was following a deer trail, the man said. The whole time I was thinking no one was going to believe me. The man said that the dark figure crossed the field in about 90 seconds without any trouble, disappearing into chest-high weeds and then into the tree line. He watched for several minutes to see if the figure would reemerge, but it never did. He initially wondered if it was a neighbor checking a nearby trail cam, or perhaps a mushroom hunter. Check-ins with his neighbors found out that neither was the case. He searched the field for footprints but found none. He later found and photographed 2 large impressions close to a nearby creek that could have been footprints, including toe indentations. It's hard to tell, he admitted. A few days later, yet another sighting happened at Mohican State Park. The following is from the BFRO website. It was June 18, 2021, about 4 p.m. at Mohican State Park, Loudonville, Ohio, in Ashland County. My best friend and I drove into the picnic area at the covered bridge, and there were no campers, hikers, or people fishing, so we drove into campsite B. It's a narrow road that is parallel to the Mohican River. Then we reached the end of this road where there is a turnaround, so we parked the car and shut off the engine. The front of the car was facing towards the covered bridge, and the Mohican River was on the driver's side of the car, and the thick woods were on the passenger side, my side, and to the rear of us. Also, it was an unusually chilly day for the month of June, and it was very cloudy, with no sun and a slight drizzle of rain. So we sat in the car with the windows down, and we could hear the birds chirping and the soft babbling sounds of the river. We sat there for about 30 minutes, talking away as women do, and I mentioned that I watched a Bigfoot show on TV and we should do Bigfoot calls. So jokingly, I started doing whoop calls, and it echoed into the small area. We laughed for a couple of minutes, and then we took a drink of our pop, and we heard 2 tree knocks. Not loud, but not soft. Instantly I was scared because the sound was very close to us. It was about 30 feet up in the thick woods, and it was a very steep, almost straight up, more of an open area. Instantly I was scared because the sound was very close to us. It was about 30 feet up in the thick woods, and it was very steep, almost straight up. I knew this was not a person because it's too dangerous to climb. This spooked both of us, so we started the car and went back to the covered bridge picnic area, which is more of an open area. Also, there were a few cars, so we did not feel alone, and my friend had to use the restroom and I stayed in the car. The woods were still on my right side, and I could hear birds chirping loud and fast, then all of a sudden they stopped. Then a rock that was about 6 inches wide came tumbling down on the ground of this steep cliff along with dry leaves falling behind it. So I looked up, and about 15-20 feet away I saw the left side of a foot, calf, and thigh and hip of an animal. It looked like it was slipping on the leaves, and it was trying to gain traction, and its leg went straight up and behind a tree. This leg looked like a bodybuilder's leg with the short black hair and was about 3 to 4 feet in length. Then my friend got into the driver's side of the car and we left. So when I got home, I looked up videos on YouTube of bears. My leg sighting does not match a bear leg because the hind leg of a bear or dog has an odd angle from the pad of the foot to its leg. But what I saw was a human-like foot with hair that connected to a calf, to a knee, to a thigh, and then to a hip, and it was super muscular. Also, there have been no bear sightings in Mohican State Park for many decades. Well, thank you for bearing with me through all of that. While it was a lot of information to process, it at least gives an idea of what people were reporting in the area at the time. So those are a few of the more credible Mohican Bigfoot sightings in recent years. It's pretty interesting to see that there was a flurry of sightings in 2020 and 2021 around the same time period, including a report from a former police officer. I want to believe that all the sightings are legit and credible, but at the same time I've seen the media attention it was generating at the time. With the paranormal, it seems like there's always people seeking attention, headlines, and fame. And it's not uncommon for some of these individuals to try to interject themselves into the situation as it happens. I'm not saying that that's the case here, but it's always something to keep in mind. From the ghost side of things, I've always heard that the Warrens were the equivalent of paranormal ambulance chasers. And from the Bigfoot side of things, one could argue that BFRO researcher / TV celebrity Matt Moneymaker isn't much different. I'm not sure anybody should trust an individual with that last name. That being said, he was certainly all over the coverage of these sightings, and in the newspapers, as well as some of the other BFRO members. Ironically, Matt would appear at Pleasant Hill Lake Park's Bigfoot Base Camp weekend last month in the Mohican area. And naturally, I would be there to observe some of the events and to crash the party, so to speak. I opted out of the full Moneymaker experience and decided to spend time at the park and doing one of their night hikes. I begrudgingly bought a headlamp. I hate those damn things. And I would join a few other Bigfoot enthusiasts to see where the alleged 2020 Bigfoot sighting occurred. I guess that it should have been no surprise that weeks before this event, newspapers were printing articles about a local BFRO researcher that claimed to have recorded Bigfoot howls in her backyard. Apparently, a group of workers at Mohican State Park weren't as impressed with the howls and stated the sounds could have simply been an alpha male coyote calling its pack. I've often wondered how versed in animal calls and noises some of these Squatch enthusiasts really are. If anything, the BFRO organization certainly knows how to create a buzz and generate cash. Honestly, I'm kinda skeptical of how deep their passion for the actual research really is. However, I do have to give them credit for their database of claimed sightings over the years. At the start of the hike, I was honestly a little put off by the greeter that asked if we were there to find an Easter bunny. Yeah. Joke or not, if the purpose of these events are to get attention to the park and to get new visitors, that wasn't the right attitude to have, in my opinion. Unfortunately, the hike wasn't very informative either. The guide barely spoke a word, and our group was basically forced to speed walk through the dark and a trail in the woods with little to no information. It was a beautiful park, though, and they even played the Harry and the Hendersons to celebrate the occasion. So hopefully they'll improve upon these issues in the years to come. I did, however, like the hosting group's collections of footprint casts they had in the center of the primitive camping area during this event. I had recently went to the Warehouse 24 gem sighting location for my own reference, and it was cool to see a cast print from the supposed sighting. I obviously didn't have any encounters during this night, but at the same time I found the experience to be beneficial to my research of the local sightings, as well as observing the mindsets of those involved. Do you like hot sauce? Perhaps it's time to dance with the Reaper. Visit our friends at Spice for Lives Foods on Facebook today. They've recently launched their first hot sauce line called Dance with the Reaper, and they will be debuting their signature taco sauce and Caribbean Rio habanero sauce in the near future. I also hear they're in the process of working on something rather ghostly. Once again, that is Spice for Lives Foods on Facebook. Stop in and visit them today. This episode was also brought to you by our good friend Spencer Shepard at B&B Concrete in Shelby, Ohio. He has some amazing stone pieces for your lawn and garden, such as Sasquatches, gargoyles, bird bass, and even dragons. Be the coolest person on your block and visit facebook.com/bnbconcreteman or email bnbconcreteman@gmail.com for more information. Earlier in this episode, I stated that I didn't see anything from the typical ghostly paranormal perspective on my visits to the park, and unfortunately the same can be said on the Bigfoot side of things. During several visits of the Mohican Forest area, I didn't have any personal experiences. It certainly wasn't because I didn't want to have an experience. It's just how it works out sometimes. I didn't see anything odd, any footprints, howls, knocks, or anything that I would consider abnormal. During my research, I was able to visit a few of the Bigfoot sighting locations we previously discussed, and it was interesting to put myself into the witness's shoes, so to speak. I was able to not only see the spots where the sightings occurred, but to also see the supposed footprint casts that were made after the fact. While I'm still a skeptic of all things Bigfoot and Big Feet related, I'm also still curious of what these people are seeing and reporting. It also makes me wonder how many of these people have seen something and won't discuss it in fears of looking crazy. Ironically, we just passed the 55th anniversary of Patterson's infamous Bigfoot footage. It's still odd to observe everybody's take on the footage. Skeptics, believers, everybody has their own takes and theories on what's happening in the video. But one thing I've noticed is the passion these people will bring to the table to debate it. I think people really want to believe in Bigfoot so badly, but when it comes down to it, there just isn't enough proof that it exists at this time. I started my Bigfoot expedition at Mohican Forest for a reason. It was close to home and there were a lot of sightings the last few years. Ironically, I also considered these investigations a warm-up for what's to come. While the Mohican Forest has been a possible hotbed of Bigfoot activity, there are places down south with much more frequent sightings. In short, the search has just begun. Well, that concludes this month's episode of the C-Bus Paranormal Paracast. As we lay Season 1 of the Paracast to rest, I would like to thank everybody that's supported myself and our team so far on this endeavor. It's truly been a unique experience. The show will be returning in January of 2023. During the next few months, I'll be recording several new episodes for our main show and for our Patreon supporters to get ahead and to also prepare for what's to come. I've already visited several locations that will be covered on our next season, and I also have a few in mind for future episodes. So it only gets weirder from here. So as I bid you all farewell for now, I'll see you all again on the other side. Please enjoy the holidays and make sure to spend time with your loved ones, and be safe out there. As always, feel free to add us on social media, or visit the soon-to-be-relaunched cbusparanormal.com for more information on the Paracast and all things C-Bus Paranormal. Once again, thank you for listening.